Today. Yes. Resist NATO campaign. We can go to maybe next slide. Resist NATO campaign in 2025 actually is the continuation of the Resist NATO campaign that started in 2024 in Washington. As you remember, the NATO summit was held in Washington, D.C. Last year. And the last year, the ILPS-US and some other organizations drove masses to the Washington, D.C. against the this NATO summit. There was a counter summit and there was a mobilization in the Washington, D.C. It got coverage from the international media, and hundreds and thousands of people actually was there chanting for people's liberation and people's rights all over the world. And we have enough of NATO's expansion and existence. So right now, as you know, the NATO summit will be in the Netherlands, in The Hague. And the organizers in the Europe, the anti-imperialists and the anti-NATO and the peace activists are come together to do the same that happened in the Washington, D.C. in the Netherlands. There will be, in the week that NATO summit will happen, there will be the People's Summit against the NATO summit, which will held in the 21st of June. And in 22nd of June, Resist NATO campaign, and there are other several campaigns which will be in the Netherlands against NATO, will join together and make a big protests in The Hague, where the NATO summit will be held. As I mentioned, the Resist NATO is a campaign where Points of Unity unites the organizations and individuals all around the world. And for this year, Resist NATO campaign has 9 points of unity. We could go to next slide. These points of unity, of course, reflects the people's will against the militarization, expansion of NATO, and the rise of the far-right politics all over the world, which is connected with the NATO as well. And most importantly, the points of unity reflects the support to the resistance and national liberation all around the world. For instance, I will not take much your time, but I will talk about few important points of unity that is very timely, I believe. For instance, the first points of unity is we oppose NATO as a US-led military alliance that is prime actor in imperialist and proxy wars of aggression, military occupation, and environmental destruction, and ensuing climate crisis resulting in the deaths and displacements of millions of people. And we are fighting against all together against this, as you know. We could go to next slide, maybe. As you know, NATO has 32 members, but actually, with its partnerships, it has more than 40 countries and organizations supporting the NATO. This is many times some organizations and people forget about this fact. The point 5 of our points of unity underlines this, says that we oppose NATO's collaboration with non-member states through partnership programs such as the Mediterranean Dialogue, Partnership for Peace, Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, and other frameworks that includes governments such as Zionist government of Israel with records of systemic violence, human rights abuses, and genocide. And I will mention one more point of unity. Maybe we could go to next slide. Yes. Point 7 in the points of unity, we support the right of the peoples and nations to self-determination and sovereignty, the exercise of their fundamental rights and freedoms, and their right to resistance against imperialist aggression. Resist NATO campaign is has differences from other campaigns that will be in The Hague, because we are clearly supporting the national liberation movements all around the world. And in the People Summit that will happen in the 21st of June, there will be speakers and workshops from all over the world that is fighting organizations and individuals fighting for the national liberation. And you could visit our website. It will be shared in the end of the webinar. Join the campaign, be part of the committees in the organizing committees and working committees. And we are looking forward to seeing you in the 21st and 22nd of June. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oz. I'll hand it directly to the next speaker. Yento.
Yes.
Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Oh, anyway. Yeah, maybe go to the next slide to introduce where I'm from. As you can see, I'm from Leeuwarden, a small city in northern Netherlands. And I'm gonna talk about how we do some local resistance against the local airbase, how it is living next to one, etc. So I'm from geen ruimte voor defensie. It would translate to like no space for the military. And yeah, we can go to the next slide and then I'll continue. Yeah, quick history. So the airbase was built in a bit before 1937, and then was the first landing of an aircraft. It was then a year later actually started service. But when during the occupation in the Second World War by Germany, the Luftwaffe took over for a little bit. So they used the airbase for in the war against the Alliance, Western Alliance. Then after the Second World War, in 1949, it became a NATO airbase, and it was one of the most used ones in Western Europe. So also used by a lot of German planes, etc. And yeah, here you have a couple of, I've named list a couple of the jets that were used on the airbase. So you get the Gloucester Meteor, the Hawker Hunter, the Starfighter, the F-16, and now the currently used ones, the F-35s. So how is it basically living next to next to a NATO airbase? Well, you got some very nasty side effects. The most obvious one living to next one is the noise pollution. So the immense noise, especially now the F-35 makes, which are way louder than the previous F-16s. Yeah, it's rough to live next to one of them. Yeah. And then besides noise, you also have the more environmental problems of the greenhouse gas emissions, of course, that contribute to global warming, but also PFAS, which is like all the microplastics that the airbase has polluted into surface waters around the airbase. So a lot of water that's used for swimming, for gardening, etc., for watering gardens, etc., has been polluted with microplastics plenty times the norm, 13,000 times the regular norm. In fact, it's insane. And of course, it takes a lot of our tax money away that could have been used for use of things like education and health. But however, I mean, I'm gonna get to this later. Why this isn't relevant, but yeah, and unfortunately, it does cost for more jobs, etc. So they argue, the airbase argues like, oh yeah, we create jobs, and yeah, material gains for local businesses, and of course, I'll get to the propaganda. Well, we're here for your safety, etc. We can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, the local activism, yeah. Previously, the activism here looked more like not in my backyard people. So it was the people living around the airbase that were like, oh, not in my backyard. Or it were pacifists that did most of the protesting. So ideologically wise, they're not really aligning with with our current stand as Geen Ruimte voor Defensie, as we are anti-militarists, and we look at this problem from a materialistic point of view. So yeah, we are currently trying to build up a movement here, but it seems to be quite difficult as the other people that previously were against the airbase here were NIMBYs and the pacifists. We tried to have we had a nice march on the 5th of April this year. We got a lot of news media for all around the country. So I would say that was a massive success. And then yeah, I'll go a bit further into the future plans of the expansion of the airbase, because we only grouped together last year in October when yeah, the main expansion plans were made public. So yeah, we mainly got together when they were announcing they wanted an extra runway and wanted a lot more flights. Now those have been cancelled, or at least the extra flights have been cancelled. They're now looking to move them to Lelystad airport currently. But however, the expansion on this airbase is not done yet. Instead of a runway, they're now wanting to put like a couple of million euros into a war room, which is a high-tech simulation room. And yeah, so there's still a lot of money being put into it, which we of course oppose. Because the propaganda they use is of course mainly okay, it's for safety, because otherwise Russia might attack, etc. And they also try to get consent by creating new polls. So recently, a couple of days ago, there was a national poll that said like, oh, most people do not mind having some kind of military location in their backyard. So that's how basically the Dutch military tries to, gain consent from the people. Yeah. Can we go back to one slide? I think I might have a bit more to say, but otherwise I don't know how much time I have. But yeah, no, I think I'm done. That was the main points of Leeuwarden, how we do it here, etc., and how we feel the negative side effects. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Much. We'll come really to our speaker from Italy, Stefano, to you.
Okay, we can go so to the slide. Is it possible to have it a little bit bigger? It's not very visible. I don't know if people can read something. Okay, anyway, if you can enlarge the picture, it will be good. Anyway, Italy is a country that has a lot of NATO bases, and they are for US Air Force and also for the Navy. We have also a lot of radars, structures, and we have also firing ranges like polygons where the new weapons are tested. So missiles and rockets, all kind of bombs. And clearly there are some regions with more infrastructures like Sardinia, Sicily, Veneto. Veneto is the region where there's Verona, Venice. In Sardinia, we have three important firing ranges, and two are among the biggest ones in Europe. Clearly, around the polygons, around the firing ranges, we have a lot of problems, health problems, also pollution of the nature, cancer, And of course, this is totally denied by the government. And they try always to minimize. In Sicily, we have a very big structure called MUOS. It's a big radar, and clearly the waves, the radio waves, also are a source of cancers for the local people. And two bases in the north, Aviano and Gedi, really in the northern Italy, have also nuclear weapons. They are stored there. We don't know exactly how many nuclear bombs, but it's clear, we know for sure they are there. So these are potentially important targets in case of war. And in Tuscany, in the area of Pisa and Florence, there's another very big base where they store a lot of ammunitions, and they are trying to enlarge this big base, also including natural reserves that are there. So not only they try to enlarge the base, but also destroying natural reserves. And what about the Italians and the perception of the NATO presence in Italy? In reality, very often the presence is not so well perceived by the people because if there are Americans living there, and you can go please to the next slide, they live in compounds. So this is, for example, in Sicily, near the base of Sigonella. And so they live there. They have, it's like a little town just for American soldiers. They have inside everything for doing sport. They have commercial centers, whatever they need. So very often they are not so visible outside.
Ah,
And so, and very often also we have another reason why we don't perceive the presence of NATO, because they are mixed up with the Italian soldiers. So there are both soldiers, so Italians and Americans. Anyway, about the Americans, we have a lot of soldiers on the Italian soil. And the coordination, the national coordination, NATO, established in December 2024, that I'm representing here, has groups, associations, and organisms more or less in every region. So we are welcoming more groups, more committees, more organizations in the recent months. So we are trying to map all everything that NATO has on the Italian soil, trying to make aware the people about the problems of this presence. Also, very often these bases are built in areas with a very high level of unemployment. So they try to push these new constructions also as an opportunity of work that anyway doesn't correspond to the reality, because where there's a military base in general, the local economy is badly affected, and just a few people can work in these areas. And anyway, even at, we consider just a touristic aspect, the presence of a military base, it's a problem, as as it was said before, noise, pollution, and lot of problems connected with this presence. So we would like to send to Amsterdam and Den Haag a group of people. We are trying to discuss about this. So as I said before, should be interesting to know who is willing to go there, to have a list, maybe to coordinate even so to meet there. I know there's in Amsterdam the meeting the 2021, and then in the next day in The Hague. So I guess we can build a good collaboration, sharing a lot of materials, sharing skills, and creating a wider net, because the groups are really so many. So we have to be closer to coordinate better our efforts. Okay, I finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefano. We'll now hand it over to Ulla to speak about the Nordic perspective.
Thank you. It's the Finnish and the Nordic perspective, since I come from Finland. Next, please. Thank you for having been invited, by the way. It's a great honor. Next. Here you see where I am in Finland, and you have Norway, Sweden, Denmark. For many people, the maps up here in the northern part of Europe are not so clear. Iceland, I will not talk about today. Next. I'm going very fast, so yeah, this one. I want to show how Finland has moved towards NATO membership. We joined the EU in 1995, and at that point I was against it, and I said we will end up in NATO, and that happens. You have to see that today 27 states, of 27 states, EU states, only 4 are not in NATO. And it went through PPF, Partnership for Peace, and so on. But maybe the most strategic was that Finland, already before we got NATO member, signed the procurement contract for 64 US F-35 fighter jets. Next. And this was, of course, a strategic signal to Russia. We had been good relations to Russia since also during the Cold War. And the US F-35 fighter jets are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, and they will be delivered by 2030 to Finland. Next. And they are a part of the Nordic problem, because Denmark has already 15 fighter jets and will get 8 to 10 more. Norway operates 52. And even though Sweden has their own JAS Gripen airplanes, fighter jets, they have been this year in March having military exercises together with the Danish F-35 in order to get them compatible. Next one. And in May 2025, the Nordic transport ministers signed a joint statement on military mobility and security of supply. And that means that the Finnish train tracks are now too broad, because they are from the Russian time. And we could travel over to Russia in 3 hours before the Ukraine war. But now they have to be narrowed down to the European track size. Next one. And this means that we can have the whole Nordic, not only by fighter jets, but also by railway connected. And if you see the smaller map, you have Tromsø and Narvik, which is in Norway. They have US bases already, and they will get, according to the DCA agreement, I will come to that. And also Kiruna, which is in Sweden, will get military bases. And if you go over the border on the bigger map, you see that Finland is crowded by railway nets and going towards the Russian border. So that is now on the agenda, to have military trains moving around in the Nordic countries. Next one, please. Here you see the NATO, how it has expanded since 1949. And Finland joined 2023, and Sweden joined 2024, and that meant that by Sweden and Finland joining, the Baltic Sea situation changed tremendously. Next one, please. Finland's NATO membership means that we have NATO's longest NATO border. It doubled by Finland's membership. It's 2,300 kilometers, meaning that we could have nuclear weapons 965 kilometers from Kremlin. It's not a very nice thing for Russia. Next one, please. And here you see that we will have also NATO bases on top of the DCA bases, which I come to soon. And one will be up in the north. That's good for the Arctic Sea thing, of course. And Mikkeli, close to the Russian border, is one. Next. Here you see the DCA, Defense Cooperation Agreements, which Finland and Sweden made in December 23 and 24. Sweden, we will have 47 Nordic US military bases. All the red spots are the planned military bases. Finland 15, Sweden 17, Norway 12, and Denmark 3. Norway has some from before. And this happened overnight because of the US-provoked Ukraine war. That made people change their mind. So I think there was a strategic plan. Next one. Here, just shortly, you see how close the eastern flank is to the Russian border, but I don't go further into this one. Next. Here you can see how clearly Russia has been isolated in the Baltic Sea. You can call it a NATO lake now. It's not a Baltic Sea. Kaliningrad is the small place down here where I don't know if you can see my pointing out it, but it's squeezed between Lithuania and Poland. And here we have St. Petersburg at the bottom of the Finnish Gulf. So this sea now is owned by NATO, more or less. Next. Yeah, in Daily Mail Online already in May 22, before we became members, Vladimir Putin warned Finland that we made a mistake after our country's president, Finland's president, told him that we will join NATO. He said it's not a good idea. Next one. And Jacques Baud, who is a very, very respected colonel in the Swiss army, he also said before we joined, by joining NATO, Sweden and Finland increased the risk of becoming involved in a nuclear conflict. Next one. Finland has not outspokenly said no to nukes in the DCA agreement with the US. The Finnish President Stubb said it would be acceptable for US nuclear weapons to be transported through Finnish territory. And Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, he indicated that he was open to hosting nuclear arms in wartime. And in January 24, he said, Sweden is not at war, but we are not at peace either. So you see that how he is opening the door. Denmark says that nothing in the DCA alters the Danish policy with regard to stockpiling or deployment of nuclear weapons on Danish territory. But if Finland and Sweden and Norway opens up, I'm sure Denmark follows. Next one. And this is happening already because in Norway says that they will not permit the stockpiling of nuclear weapons, landmines, blah, 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 in their territories. But they also said that the parliament asks the government to have a dialogue with Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. And since Finland and Sweden have opened up the door, I'm sure the other ones will follow, unfortunately. Next. This all happened, you see how we moved towards the Russian border. Despite the promises that Western political leaders made at the meeting with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1990. There is a zero missing. They said not 1 inch eastward. That was 1990. There was 15 NATO members. Today there are 32, and they have all become. They have all enlarged towards the eastern border. Next one, please. The Ukraine war, I say it's the result of all broken promises. Gorbachev was very, very positive when he in Prague 87 talked about our common European home. You can see how the Western leaders are laughing at him. Blah, blah, blah. You believed us, but we will break all the promises. And we sit there now with the Ukraine war. Next one, please. Also, Vladimir Putin warned at the big Munich Security Conference in February 2007. He reminded about the broken promises. Next one, please. You can read them afterwards then, because we are in a short of time. And then he warned clearly, and he accused the United States of creating a unipolar world. And also saying that Russia is constantly being taught about democracy. But he said, how about your own democracy? And he was absolutely right. Next one, please. Also, the Pope Francis said in May 23, NATO may have caused Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO was barking at Russia's door. So we see what the enlargement, and now with the military bases coming also to the Nordic countries, we are really in deep trouble. Next one, please. What kind of ally do we have? In September 2002, the Nord Stream, you can see the Nord Stream here, blew up. Next one, please. President Joe Biden, Senator Ron Johnson, Polish President Andrzej Duda spoke openly before that of getting rid of the pipeline. And when the explosions happened, Radoslav Sikorski, who was the former foreign minister of Poland and former member of the EU Parliament, openly congratulated the US on Twitter. Thank you, USA. For those who don't know about the Nord Stream, go into YouTube and see Jeffrey Sachs' incredible information about what happened. Next one, please. These are our allies. Hastings Lionel Ismay, the first secretary of NATO, he said the purpose of NATO is to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. And the blowing up gas pipes 3 and 4 is certainly keeping Germany's economy down. Here you can see the gas prices. Next one. And who is, next please, and who is making profits? Most US liquefied natural gas exports head to Europe at strong prices. And now when President Trump has been doing his Ukraine business, there are also reports on negotiations to open the Nord Stream 2, which is still there, subsea pipeline, with the backing of US investors, of course. Europe can stay out. Next one, please, and then I will finish. So this is where we are and what nice allies we have. And by the way, there are very many suspicions that it was not only US that blew it up, but UK and Norway were very helpful. But you have to check it out yourself. Thank you. See you all in The Hague and Amsterdam.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for covering so much in such little time. And these slides will also be available to everybody after the fact. We'll be sending the recording to everybody who registered, and it'll be available on our website, which you can find in the chat. Thank you so much. We'll hand it to the next presenter, Chloe from the Union of Cypriots. Chloe, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe from the Union of Cypriots, and I'm going to be talking about the situation in Cyprus today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we're talking about Cyprus today in the European section. However, that's because it's a European Union member state. But as you can see from this map, Cyprus is very much located geographically in Southwest Asia and North Africa. And that's very important because Cyprus was part of the non-aligned movement. It joined the non-aligned movement in 1961, just after its founding. But to join the EU in 2004, one of the conditions for joining was actually to leave the non-aligned movement. So Cyprus is a very complex issue, and to understand it, you kind of need to understand the historical context and the geographical context. So Cyprus has always been, because of its geographical location, it's always been multi-ethnic, it's always been multi-religious. So I know that everyone likes to think, well, or assumes instantly that Cyprus is an issue of Greeks or Turks and Greeks and Turks fighting. Please get that out of your head because it's not accurate. It's a multi-ethnic society. There are many groups there with the Maronites, Arab Cypriots, Armenian Cypriots, and of course Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. And because of its geographical location, it's always been a sort of prize for successive powers for over 400 years. And so it has been under colonial rule for centuries. And sadly, that is still perpetuated to this day, just in a sort of neo-colonial way, with the presence of the NATO bases that are there. And as you can see from this picture, there are 5 NATO members with military presence on this island. So we have 2 occupying powers, which is Turkey, who occupy 36% of the island, and Britain, who occupy 3% of the island with what they call their sovereign base areas. And then there's also the British, who have carte blanche control over the UK bases. And then you also have French military presence there, which is a more recent thing. It was offered to them by David Cameron, I believe. And then you have the Greek forces who work in coordination with the Republic of Cyprus. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so here's a map of all of our NATO friends. They're not our friends, but our NATO occupiers that we have on this island. And so, as I mentioned, when Cyprus gained independence from Britain in 1960, before that it was a British colony, the Cypriots had fought a national liberation movement against the British, which there was much complications with that, but in 1960 Cyprus gained independence from Britain. However, one of the conditions for this independence, and in fact the largest focus of the treaty of the establishment of Cyprus, was actually focused on that 3% of the island, the British bases, and that they should be used without restriction or interference from Cyprus by the UK, and that is in terms of land, sea, and air. So Britain retained those sovereign bases, and as you have probably all see in the news at the moment, they're being used at an alarming rate in support of Israel's suspected genocide in Gaza. And they're also being used to bomb Yemen, who are, some would argue, defending Palestine. Then we've got the Turkish occupation in the north, which I can say from my own personal experience, the Turkish force in Cyprus, the middle dot on the map there, that base there is built on my grandparents' home. So my grandparents were displaced from what is now the occupied north of Cyprus, and some of them murdered as well by the Turkish invading army. And it's important to note that at the time of the invasion, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was very clear in their support for the Republic of Cyprus, and for Cyprus's sovereignty. And they offered solidarity at a time when the Turkish NATO forces were invading Cyprus. And it's a bit of a cruel twist of fate that the displacement and the sort of stagnant procrastination on this particular occupation is now being used to displace hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza through the use of intelligence gathering flights from the UK bases, and to entrench, and it simply entrenches both occupations further. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so here we have this is a visual representation of Cyprus today. We've got the Republic of Cyprus. So as you can see here, we would call this the free areas of Cyprus. This is a republic. This isn't what some people would wrongly call the Greek side. This is a republic. And then we have the red areas, which is occupied by the state of Turkey. And then you've got the United Nations buffer zone in grey, and the areas under control of the United Kingdom, which are those black area there. It's 3% of the island. Yeah, as you can see from the map, and it shows on Google as the map on the bottom right. It actually says on Google that these areas are actually part of the United Kingdom. So you can see where United Kingdom ends and then Cyprus begins. So those bases, which as I mentioned, said in the Treaty of Establishment, are used without consulting the Cypriot government on what activities are taking place there. So this is a form of neo-colonialism. It's just modern day colonialism. And although Cyprus is a republic, many would argue that its independence is it's in question. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so as I mentioned, I've mentioned that Cyprus was part of the non-aligned agreement, so the non-aligned movement, and it was used by the UK to continue its military operations in the region, and it was sort of coerced into leaving that non-aligned movement. At the moment, those Akrotiri bases that have the most attention on them, and that is because of the spy flights which are flying over Gaza, their intelligence gathering, and also there are suspected weapons transfers just by the aircraft and what they're usually used to do. People suspect that they are transferring weapons from Cyprus to Israel. They're also strengthening those bases with more jets which can fuel jets in the air. Sorry, I don't have the right terminology there. And at the moment, as I'm a diaspora Cypriot and I'm in the UK, I can tell you that there's a real there are questions about these aquaterial bases are really rising in Parliament. However, there has been an unprecedented block on these kind of questions. So although they're answering to them to a certain extent, they're also blocking questions about specifically about what those bases in Cyprus are being used for, which, as I say, is unprecedented and also impacts on UK, not just Cypriot citizens' rights and also the Palestinian rights, but also the rights of those in the UK who have a right to for their questions to be answered within Parliament. And yeah, they've sent over 500 spy flights over Gaza since December 2023. And the American Air Force was also in Cyprus earlier this year in January. And they're talking about how they're going to be strengthening their capacity there. And yeah, they're developing their presence there as well, under the guise of supporting stability in the region, which we all know is usually the opposite of that. Yeah, and then I would also just say that in Cyprus, there's been multiple protests. In the Republic of Cyprus, there are constant protests in support of Palestine, but then also there's been some coordinated protests at the Akrotiri bases, and then also coordinated with protests in London outside the Ministry of Defence. However, and also in Cypriot Parliament, all parties have expressed their will that they do not want the British presence on the island anymore. This is recent. However, I would say that there's a real lack of unity in Cyprus, political unity in Cyprus, and therefore a lot of the action that is taken is sadly ineffectual. And because there's a lot of interference from the EU and the UN, who fund activities that would promote a bizonal, bicommunal federation in Cyprus, which in effect normalizes the occupation in the north. That if trying to protest against these bases and then also trying to campaign for a bizonal, bicommunal federation are counter to each other, because they're counter to liberation struggle if you're normalizing those relations with the occupier, and therefore quite a bit of the activism that you see in Cyprus is sadly I would say empty saviorism when it's on the front lines of Western imperialism, and it doesn't do anything to strengthen the security of Southwest Asia and North Africa. But we as the Union of Cypriots, as an anti-imperialist organization, and some other parties in Cyprus, we are fighting for one unitary state, free of foreign bases and the imperialist agenda. And I think that might be my time up. Sorry if that was a bit scattered, but yeah, I think that's everything for Cyprus. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chloe. Yes, and for keeping to a very short time, it's very challenging, but we wanted to get a broad look at overview of what's happening around the world. And that leads us to the US-led pivot to Asia, and I'll hand it to Janice.
Hi everyone, I'm Janice and I'm representing ALPAS today. We're an organization for Filipinos and allies based in Berlin, Germany. And we're supporting the Filipino migrant community here, but are also connecting our fight to the anti-imperialist struggle in the Philippines and the fight for national and social liberation of the Filipino people. I'm going to start with some basic facts on the next slide. The Philippines are an archipelago made of over 7,000 islands with a population of over 100 million people, with between 10 to 20 million people living and working overseas. And within the country, around 75% people are living and working in the countryside. The Philippines also rank fifth in the world for their abundance of natural resources, including gold, timber, and oil. So moving on to the next slide, why did this US pivot to Asia happen, and why is there so much military buildup in the Philippines? So basically, the US wants to ensure its control and its influence over the Asia Pacific region and its rich natural resources and the trading routes. But yeah, it's one of its main reasons is to contain the rise of its rival China as a competing imperialist power. And there's a very telling quote from 1901 from US Senator Albert Beveridge, who said, and I quote, "The power that rules the Pacific is the power that rules the world. Lines of navigation from our ports to the Orient and Australia converge at and separate from the Philippines." End quote. And then moving on to 2011, under President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the US announced their official pivot to Asia, saying that, and I quote, "The future of politics will be decided in Asia, not Afghanistan or Iraq, and the United States will be right at the center of the action." Quote ends. And yeah, they have been fortificating the so-called First Island Chain, which is the plan to surround China with naval bases for the US to project their power and restrict China's sea access. And the fortification of these chains has led to increased US militarism, domination, and aggression in the area. And just another example, in 2020, NATO released the NATO 2030 United for a New Era document, which is 67 pages long and mentions China 82 times, just to put that into relation. And another very recent example is that on May 15th, the German-Philippine Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed, which further demonstrates how US allies are now following along after the US. And yeah, these kinds of treatments are made under the guise of peace and security, but they don't serve the interests of the Filipino people at all. So let's move on to the next slide to talk a little bit more about the US military bases in the Philippines. So yeah, ever since its colonization by the US, the Philippines have been very strategically important for them as a so-called unsinkable aircraft carrier. But the people's resistance against the US bases has always been very strong, especially throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in 1987, there was a constitution that prohibited foreign military bases, troops, and facilities, except under a treaty duly concurred by the Senate. And then in 1992, the Senate voted in favor of rejecting the renewal of the basis agreement, which was very quickly undermined in 1999 by the VFA, or Visiting Forces Agreement, which authorized the permanent stay of the US troops in the Philippines under the guise of joint military exercises. In 2014, under Barack Obama, the EDCA was signed, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which essentially turned the whole Philippine archipelago into one huge US military base. And this has all happened in cooperation with the Philippines president, currently the Marcos regime. It portrays itself as a defender of Philippine sovereignty, but continues to sell out and betray the people's interests, selling out their labor and selling out the country's natural resources, and allowing unrestricted US military presence. There are 9 official EDCA bases in the Philippines, but there are way more unregistered ones. Marcos also tied Philippine foreign policy to US foreign policy with the false claim that the country's interests are identical to American imperialist interests. Let's move on to the next slide, which is about US-led counterinsurgencies. Counterinsurgencies mean military or political action taken by a state against non-state adversaries. And yeah, the US coined this term and yeah, the US bases and troops stationed in the Philippines are used to direct and to participate in counterinsurgency, leading to increased militarization. They're targeting the well-organized people's resistance movements with parties such as the New People's Army or the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, who are fighting for real solutions that would lead to the Philippines actually becoming sovereign and democratic. This resistance of the people is a huge threat to the US military control, and through them suppressing these movements, leads to massive human rights violations and violence against communities. For example, through the killings, torture, and forced disappearance or abductions of NPA and CPP members, but also of civilians and intentional attacks against civilians as well. And I think this already touches on the next slide, on the impacts on the community and people and environment. And yeah, maybe we can move on to the next slide. And yeah, in general, it can be said that the US military bases lead to a lot of landlessness, poverty, and inequality for the Filipino people. These bases, they take up a lot of land, which is farmland, and they also take up indigenous people's ancestral lands and leave behind toxic waste, which harms not only the environment, but has been proven to lead to severe health conditions and health issues, birth problems with the Filipino people living close to these bases. And they're also often located in very high biodiversity areas. So yeah, the environmental damage they're causing is immense. And yeah, also the aerial bombings and live fire drills done by the US troops caused the destruction of the livelihood and the displacement of people. And sometimes these military exercises force entire towns to shut down and stop farming or fishing for weeks at a time, which is very grave for any farmer or the fisher people. And there's also a quote from Pamalakaya, which is an alliance of activist fisherfolk, who are saying that it is unacceptable that the livelihoods of Filipino fisherfolk become compromised for the provocative and militaristic actions of the US in our waters. The presence also increases acts of violence against women, children, and gender-oppressed people. And there is one very public case, which was the killing of Jennifer Lodi, a Filipino trans woman who was murdered by an US Marine in 2014 in Olongapo. And this US Marine's charge was downgraded from murder to homicide in 2015. And then in 2020, he was granted an absolute pardon, so he didn't suffer any consequences at all. And this is just one of the cases that became very public because a lot of groups were like protesting and spreading awareness. So there are many, many more of these cases that go undocumented. And yeah, now I'm gonna pass it on to Evie. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janice, for that. So I think just to shortly wrap that up, so there has been already a lot of context on the impacts that this has on the communities in the Philippines and the people there, and on the environment. So yes, let's go now to also the Philippine Revolution as an answer to imperialist war. So I think what we see is when there is this very strong state violence, fascist state violence that's being backed by U.S. imperialism, because of the U.S. wanting to assert their interests. What is really needed is also a very strong and massive counter movement. So when we look at the Philippines, it's very interesting to see that they have built successfully this very strong movement, which has both legal components but also armed components. And it is actually this movement of mass organizations that is the strongest counter to fascist violence. So, for example, there is organizations for workers, for peasants, for women, for youth, and for a lot of other progressive classes and organizations. And so, for example, during the May Day, they had this really big protest of several thousand people. But especially in the rural areas where the fascist violence is also very strong, there's a lot of very strong organizing. Because there also you have the peasant class, which is one of the most oppressed classes in the Philippines. And that is also where it is very strongly linked to the armed struggle that they're waging. So the Philippine movement has been very successful in arousing, organizing, and mobilize the masses for genuine change, which is also one of the reasons why we usually put counterinsurgency in quotes, because even though the US and the Philippine government want to assert that they are having their fascist violence against a non-state actor. Actually, when you look at the situation, you can almost say that the Philippine Revolution has already liberated so many areas that it's also become a state actor. So there's more than 1 million people that are actually part of the responsibility of the revolutionary movement. So the revolutionary movement provides healthcare, provides education, and defends them against the fascist violence. So what's also very important for us as anti-imperialists to highlight there and also to assert is that people have the right to fight back. So even in international law, this is a recognized right of peoples, but also just generally as moral or political right, we have to assert that people can fight back against oppressive rule and for social change. And especially also that they have the right to fight for national liberation from US imperialism. And another thing that we also like to highlight is that it's actually the People's War in the Philippines. And that's not only legitimate, but it's really a necessary answer to imperialist war. So to US further aggressing in the Philippines. We can see this, for example, because it ties down the fascist armed forces in this civil war rather than becoming another proxy army for the US in their conflict with China. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the revolution in the Philippines is one of the longest running liberation struggles in the world. It has been undefeated for more than 5 decades already. And like I said, it's really a significant threat to US imperialism as it is consolidating more and more political power. Because basically it's taking away this very important semi-colony of the US. As Janice already mentioned as well before, it's a very strategic point for the US. So a liberated Philippines would really mean a huge blow to US imperialism. And it's also currently one of the key deterrents why the US is not able to already use the country more and more as a launchpad for its war against China. So when we look at it at this context, it becomes also a very important struggle for us as anti-imperialists to connect with and to support, because our support to the Philippine Revolution becomes a very integral part of the anti-imperialist worldwide movement. So maybe if we can go to the next slide, which is also our last slide. So I'm from Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle. We're an international solidarity organization. And I think it's very important that, you know, when we are internationalists or anti-imperialists, that we also support the struggles of the oppressed peoples of the world, especially in the neo-colonies, and support their national liberation struggles that are actually turning into imperialist war, into revolutionary war. And they are currently also the strongest weapons against US imperialist domination. We can see that in these countries, it's really where the contradictions are super sharp, where the people are extremely exploited, and it's a very ripe ground for revolutionary struggle. As we can see in the Philippines, with this armed movement that has thousands of fighters that are liberating the country at the moment. So it also deserves our international support. So if you're interested in doing expanding solidarity with the Philippine Revolution, there's a lot of different things you can do. I think an important aspect is always education because it's not often in the news, so it's important that we also spread it in our networks, and also that we build organizations such as ALPAS or FFPS, and that we mobilize in action as well. So part of that is, of course, through the Resist NATO campaign, but if you would like to learn more, please visit our website as well. Get in touch with us and see how you can strengthen the Filipino people's struggle. So there's also some information on ALPAS, where Janice is from, and then also for friends, you can learn more about the Philippines and learn more also how to support the struggle there. And with that, I'll hand it back to, I think, Magdalena.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice and Evie, so much for sharing this information about what's happening in the Philippines and how people are fighting back. I'll hand it to, just want to note, we are a little bit behind schedule, but we have two very important speakers left, and I hand it now to Claudia.
Thank you, everyone. It's been great to be here and listening to everyone's speakers today. My name is Claudia O'Brien Moscoso. I am from the Black Alliance for Peace. We can do the next slide, please. Yeah, and so I'm going to be talking about what US, EU, NATO axis of domination and what that has meant for the Americas, and also a campaign that we've been working on in this region, along with partner organizations throughout the region, called the Zone of Peace campaign. Next slide. And if we can play this video, I think if possible to do it like at 1.5 speed, just so we don't have to be here for, yeah.
The prison system, the law. It's no secret that these institutions intentionally crush and terrorize Black and oppressed people within the U.S. But the brutal violence the U.S. military inflicts on colonized Black and brown people
is often hidden from our view. Even though the U.S. military is the largest and most expensive of any country, by far.
We have new, beautiful equipment that comes along with $2.5 trillion in spending, all made in the USA.
The U.S. military has literally divided the earth into 11 areas of responsibility, each patrolled by a different command.
The U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM, polices one of these areas of responsibility. The SOUTHCOM region covers 15 million miles
and represents about 1/6 of the landmass of the world. Headquartered in Miami, U.S. Southern Command includes 32 countries, 19 in Central and South America and 13 in the Caribbean.
And that's not to mention 16 U.S. colonies like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which don't have political independence as sovereign states and are not represented in the U.S. government.
SOUTHCOM grew out of the U.S. military occupation of Panama in the first decade of 1900. This was when the U.S. government built the Panama Canal to secure trade routes for its elite and business class. It was established during World War II, originally under the name Caribbean Defense Command.
It formalized the government's control over the Caribbean, which had begun decades prior during the Panama invasion. Now, SOUTHCOM has at least 4 bases in the region, including Guantanamo Bay in Cuba.
The U.S. military uses its bases in Honduras and El Salvador as access points to reach other strategic locations, such as Nicaragua, Venezuela and Colombia, and Guatemala.
Joint exercises and military-to-military contact programs between the United States and regional militaries are a major aspect of SOUTHCOM's activities.
While SOUTHCOM says these military operations promote security cooperation,
We built that team, we built that camaraderie.
build regional partnerships, and strengthen democratic principles. In reality, SOUTHCOM programs have supported dictatorial regimes and militarized governments in the region.
Like that of Papa and Baby Doc, who ruled Haiti in the late 1950s until the mid-1980s.
and the Colombian government, which right now is killing indigenous and African-descended human and land rights activists.
These governments do the bidding of the US by economically exploiting their own country for the benefit of US corporations and by squashing popular rebellion.
As natural disasters and political crises, including the US-led war on drugs, escalated in the 1990s, Southcom activity increased.
Good evening. This is the first time since taking the oath of office that I felt an issue was so important, so threatening, that it warranted talking directly with you, the American people. All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs. Tonight, I'm announcing a strategy that reflects the coordinated, cooperative commitment of all our federal agencies.
Every year, Southcom uses humanitarian assistance exercises and disaster response efforts as military training platforms.
But instead of stemming drug flows and feeding the poor, Southcom's true goal is to destabilize socialist countries like Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, as well as disrupt Latin American and Caribbean nations' relationship with Russia, China, and Iran.
The absolute urgency with which we have to maintain our competitive edge in this region, increasingly contested strategic space in the global competition with China and Russia, and we do maintain our positional advantage here. However, that advantage is eroding, and it's challenging our ability to maintain the favorable balance of regional power directly called for here in this hemisphere in the National Defense Strategy.
The Black Alliance for Peace stands against the growing influence and power of Southcom and its ever-increasing militarization of the region.
We demand the end of Southcom and call for a zone of peace in Latin America and the Caribbean, in which the people's right to self-determination is realized.
And conflicts between nations are resolved peacefully. No compromise, no retreat.
Well, we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned in the chat, the video was made 2 years ago, so it's slightly out of date. But as I said, the general information is still accurate. And so the way that in our Americas, or Nuestra America, which is a terminology found that Jose Marti first discussed and has been theorized through numerous revolutionary key players in the region, both in North and South America and the Caribbean. And one of the campaigns and one of the ways that people in the region are fighting back against this NATO incursion that is mostly felt through Southcom, but also through joint military exercises with NATO forces, with regional militaries and air forces, are through the expansion of Southcom. We see with the up and down from the Pacific Ocean, from the Panama Canal down to the bottom of Chile, that bases are expanding throughout in an effort to, as comrades from the Philippines were also explaining, basically setting up the stage for an eventual war with China. We see that also through various joint military exercises, such as Operation Trade Winds, which is really based in the Caribbean, as a way that, as Southcom has said in their position statements and position papers, is to defeat the incursion of forces into the hemisphere from both Russia and China, particularly China, when it comes to the expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative, with regional actors signing on to that. So the Zone of Peace campaign is an effort to activate the popular movement in our region in support of the call that the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, or CELAC, issued in 2014 in Cuba, in Havana, Cuba, to make the Americas region a zone of peace, meaning no incursions from the US, whether it's through sanctions, whether it's through regime change efforts in Venezuela more recently, but continuingly in Cuba and Nicaragua as well. This campaign is informed by the Black radical peace tradition. For us, that means we define peace as not the absence of conflict, but rather the defeat of interests and structures that generate war, and state violence, such as colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, and all forms of imperialism, through self-defense and struggle, right? For us, peace is not just we're not a pacifist organization. And in order to actually achieve true peace, is through organization and self-defense, right? So the fight for a zone of peace is an attempt to expel all these nefarious forces from our region. We discuss rights and human rights as being people-centered human rights, so it's not as an ideologically and discursive way to separate from the Western notion of human rights that often weaponizes that in order to justify war. People-centered human rights are non-oppressive rights that reflect the highest commitment to universal human dignity and social justice that individuals and collectives define and secure for themselves through social struggle. This is the Black radical tradition's approach to human rights. The framework also provides, as I was mentioning, an alternative and a theoretical and practical break with the race and class-bound liberalism and mechanistic state-centered legalism that informs mainstream human rights, as using human rights as a way to justify war. Next slide. Thank you. So we launched the campaign back in 2023 on April 4th in 3 different locations in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, with our member organization Molegaf, and in Haiti. And we have plenty of resources. I'll just put it in the chat as well. Plenty of resources on the specifics of Haiti and how US-led interventionism into Haiti, and it's maybe not necessarily felt specifically through NATO, but in Haiti, the justification and US and NATO presence is felt through the core group, which is a collective of governments from the region and also NATO countries that have unilaterally assigned themselves essentially dictatorial powers over Haitian affairs, with the involvement and basically the blessings of the UN as well. This includes Brazil, this includes France, this includes the US, Canada, etc. And we also launched in Havana, Cuba, which is where the declaration was made of SELAC, of the state actors coming together to say that the region should be designated as a zone of peace, so that that would necessitate no more bases, that would necessitate no more of these joint military exercises, no more sanctions as war. And the third place that we launched was in Washington, D.C. And in these past few years, we've been working with the Popular Steering Committee to really get to know the organizations and the struggles in their countries. So a lot of organizations are actually mostly based in the Caribbean and Latin America, not really the global North. Because the call for a zone of peace came from the Caribbean, it was important to us to have the organizational structure of this, the organizational pull and advancement for this campaign to be also led by the grassroots of that region. Next slide. So, and I'm sorry, one of the demands is in Spanish, but I was translating it to English as well. So the first demand of the campaign is to dismantle Southcom and to shut down the 76, and that's at least, right? At least 76 US military bases and installations in the region. I live in Lima, Peru, and I can tell you even in just the past several years of a US-backed coup regime, there's been an expansion of NATO bases all throughout, specifically the Pacific coast, but also in the Amazon and in the Andean mining corridor, which also has some of the country's highest reserves of natural resources and rare earth minerals. So, again, why imperialism does what it does. The next demand being end US NATO militarism in the Americas. So ending these joint military exercises, US NATO military exercises, close foreign military bases, installations and enclaves, and withdraw foreign occupation troops. Again, just to cite the country that I'm in right now, in Peru, since the December 7, 2002 coup against our democratically elected president, there have been almost back-to-back military exercises with the US, with Southcom, with NATO forces, and militaries throughout the region. So it is preparing these armed forces in what is going to be an eventual buildup, right, in the Pacific Ocean. The next demand that we are working on are disbanding US-sponsored state terrorist training facilities. So I'm sure people have heard of the School of the Americas, right? But now it's named the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, formerly the School of the Americas, in Fort Benning, Georgia, US, and terminate US as well as foreign training police forces, including the IOF, which enjoys many contracts and programs in training state forces, not just in the global south, but police forces up north. Next slide. Another main demand of the campaign is imposing military intervention into Haiti and to support the people-centered movement for democracy and self-determination. Since the 2004 coup against the democratically elected president at that point, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, Haiti has been in back-to-back invasions, whether it's maneuvered through the MINUSTAH office of the UN or the BNU office, again, citing this unelected group of governments and state actors throughout the world, many in NATO, that are snuffing out any sort of popular elected government. For many years now, there's been no elected representative in Haiti. These have all been imposed via these UN mechanisms and through US imperialism. So NATO presence in Haiti particularly is felt through the core group, right? So through those mechanisms, and right now through the US backed Kenyan-led multi-service support mission, MSS mission into Haiti that they want to force into another UN peacekeeping mission. And of course, we remember the last UN peacekeeping mission in Haiti that, there was a cholera epidemic where, hundreds of thousands of people were sick. The numbers are outrageous. And, so that is the way that, at least in Haiti, NATO's presence is felt. Another main demand of the campaign is returning Guantanamo to Cuba and ending colonialism in the Americas. The US must give back to the Cuban people and their government the territory it illegally occupies. The US and European states must end their colonial occupations of lands and peoples in the Americas, including Puerto Rico, the Malvinas, Martinique, and others. And then, of course, ending imperialist sanctions and unilateral coercive measures. As we see, sanctions are war, ending illegal sanctions, blockades, and unilateral coercive measures against regional states and peoples, including all economic warfare and lawfare, and recognizing their sovereignty. Next slide, please. So objectives for the campaign is, and something that we've been building out, is building a people-centered campaign that coordinates anti-imperialist, anti-war, and pro-peace organizations, political parties, labor and social justice organizations, as well as movements across our regions to move our Americas toward building alternative institutions and centers of power. So for that, we've built and that is another objective of the campaign, we've established a people's-centered Americas-wide coordinating structure, the US NATO Out of Our Americas Network, so that people can join and get involved in whether we call Days of Action, which we will be calling for June 24th and 25th. As people are in The Hague, people in our region will also be mobilizing against NATO expansion in our region at the local level. And then, of course, strengthening an America's wide consciousness among the peoples of the region, understanding that NATO expansion, Southcom expansion, right, is a detriment to the sovereignty of our peoples, of our lands, and really of our futures. Next slide. And this is a little bit more about the network that I just mentioned. So this is the popular structure of the campaign, right? This is where organizations from not just the region, but we're discussing opening it up even outside the region through the Solidarity Network, so that organizations are able to join and use that as a platform to connect to other organizations in the region that are working on similar things, whether it's ending the occupation and intervention into Haiti or closing Southcom bases, which, like I said, are expanding all throughout the region, and not just causing environmental damage, but of course damage to the people in the local areas as well. So if you want to check out any more of the information, and I'm glad that we're sort of connecting with the Resist NATO campaign, because of course a lot of our objectives are similar, right? But if you want to find out more about the campaign, you can check out zoneofpeace.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claude, for that presentation on the Zone of Peace campaign. Yes, let's all definitely support this really important campaign. And you can find more information in the chat. And now we have our final input from Maxwell, who is a member of the Center for Rural Development in Togo, who wasn't able to be here live, but has submitted a video. This will be in French. So please join the English channel. I think we kind of mixed up the translation, but I think if you join, I think it's going to be in the English channel, which has been translated to French. And then Chet, if you can now, yes, translate to English. Yes, Chet, that's if that's possible. And yes, so everybody please join, unless you speak French. The interpretation is the globe. You should see a globe or 3 dots. If you click 3 dots, like the more, there should be something called interpretation, and you choose the English channel. And yes, everybody just go check that out. You should be able to hear Chet. And then I will also share the written out English translation in the chat in case this somehow goes wrong, but it should work. We can do this. Okay, let's go.
Bonjour à tous, j'espère que vous allez bien. Je suis Maxwell Evening Koumessi.
All doing well. My name is Maxwell. I'm the director of the executive director of a organization, the Center for the Rural Development. I'm also a member of ILPS in Africa. I want to speak quickly about, thank you also for the opportunity to speak to you so that I can participate in this activity. First, I'm going to speak about the reasons that motivated us to kick out the military bases, American and French military bases from the alliance of the Sahel states.
Vu le départ aussi des bases françaises.
And from the perspective of the countries that were able to kick out the French military bases. Specifically Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Politique vraiment complexe. Donc, avant de toucher du doigt les raisons, nous allons rapidement faire l'historique.
Before we speak about the reasons that we kicked them out, we're going to talk about the history of the presence of those military bases in these countries. First in Mali, it was Mali that kicked out the French military bases first, the 15th of August, 2022. So it was initiated by the new government, the junta in Mali, towards the French that was getting closer to Russia. So there was a strong development of the anti-French perspective through these series of coups d'etat. And then in Niger, it was in the 22nd of December 2023 that we kicked out the French. There was 1,600 French soldiers that were based there. And then also in Niger, there was American military forces that were kicked out in 2024. In the non-AES, Alliance of Sahel States, countries that have been kicking out French military personnel, like the Senegal just recently rejected them, starting in March 2025 until the end of 2025. We're being assured that there will be no more French soldiers in Senegal. Same thing in Ivory Coast. We're starting to see that the end of French military presence in West Africa. And also in Chad, we've been seeing the departure of French military forces. So not just in the Alliance of Sahel States, but in other countries, we're seeing the departure of French and American military forces. So now we're going to talk about the reasons that we have for kicking them out. So one of the reasons is terrorism is a cancer that is impacting our countries. The departure of those military bases that had actually participated in the struggle against terrorism in Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger is happening in a complex socioeconomic security context. After the departure of the French military bases, we thought that we would be invaded by terrorism, but we actually realized that we were wrong and that Africans we can take charge of our own security. So we can approach the reasons that were at the basis for kicking them out of our countries. The first is the demand for self-determination. So we decided to take charge of our destiny, our security destiny, and not leave it to the hands of foreign militaries. And we want to take charge of our sovereignty, because the presence was more and more rejected by the population. The second reason is to end foreign interventions. And despite the presence of foreign military forces, the security around terrorism actually was getting worse. And so there was we lost confidence in the ability of foreign countries to handle the security situation in our countries because it was deteriorating. And despite the cooperation of international forces, it was getting worse. The third reason, the popular sustainment and social mobilization of our movements, there was a strong popular sentiment and support, social mobilization to get rid of these military forces. There was a strong anti-French and anti-Western sentiment in the population. And these social networks were against the presence. So the fourth reason was the emergent social political international relations situation. So those countries had started becoming closer with Russia and Turkey. And so the emergence of a geopolitical relationships. And the fifth reason is the regional dynamic of solidarity. So the AES states are putting together a regional network to support each other. So these countries were recognizing that there needed to be regional formation of Sahel states, but it was never committed to under the French occupation. So now the Sahel states are organizing their own strength and their own countries that are acting in self-determination to support each other to handle the terrorist security situation. Oh, I just lost the audio. I can't hear anything.
Bonjour à tous,
Oh,
j'espère que vous
I can hear this.
véritablement contre le terrorisme. Voilà. Yeah. Donc voilà ces 5.
Oh, it looks like the audio gets cut out.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, he was saying those are the 5 reasons that led to the removal of the bases. Oh. Okay, to finish my presentation. Okay, so I'll speak about several advancements of these countries in all the domains since the departure of the French forces and the military bases. So since the departure of these military bases, these notably American and French military bases from the Sahel states, we've been able to enact several reforms, political, economic, and security advancents. The first is the advancement of the regional security cooperation. So the creation of the Sahel states has been able to handle or advance the security question of the interests of the Sahel states against incursions. And there have been numerous joint activities that have been initiated, notably the coordination of the armies of these 3 countries to fight against terrorism. Moving away from security cooperation with France and opening up more multilateral relationship with Russia. The departure from ECOWAS. So because there were sanctions against our countries because of that were judged to be unjust by the ECOWAS countries because of the coup d'etat. And then also the project of the creation of the Confederation of the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, for political and economic benefit. So this is centered on self-determination and the intention to have a rupture with French economic domination and the will to create a shared currency for the Alliance of Sahel States to move away from the CFA franc and other Western monetary standards. And then also the nationalization of industries and natural resources. So nationalization and national control of the natural resources, gold, aluminum, and cotton are things that are being controlled by national industries. Also, this is helping the investment into social services and the reform of the army and the reinforcement of developing our sovereignty. And these are the advancements that we've been able to enact since the departure of French military. So to summarize, the kicking out of French and American military bases came from several factors: the disillusionment of the security, and then the popular pressure, and then help from other countries, and movement towards sovereignty. This is the direction that we've been going. This is showing the developed will to rupture with dependence on, to not be perpetually indentured to Western countries and Western interests, and showing that the military of the Alliance of Sahel states can assure their own security. So I'm going to finish my presentation here. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to make it in person, but my agenda has been really busy, and so I had to just make a video to share with you. Thank you very much for this. Goodbye.
Bonjour à tous.
Thank you so much, Chat, for the translation, and everybody for sticking with us until the end. We have come to the end. We are just discussing. Yes, so we would still like to take have a little bit of time for a question or two that's maybe burning in your mind. You have the speakers. You can write it in the chat, or if you promise to stick to a question, you can unmute and ask it directly to our speakers. And thank you again for the translation. Thank you. And to all of our speakers. Wow.
So I would like to ask what will be the next step. So, okay, we have the meeting in the Netherlands. Are we going to have another meeting before that date?
Yes, I can answer that shortly. If you're not already involved in Resist NATO campaign, we invite you to get involved. And you can do that. Could you actually go to the next slide, Norwin? Yes, you can sign on to the campaign and also get involved in planning for the People Summit and this joint protest action. Yes, we need everybody. Fighting militarism and US-led war and US NATO expansion across the world needs everyone, wherever you are. So whether you do a counter protest where you are, or you join us in The Hague, in Amsterdam, we really need everybody to build this movement. But yes, you can get in touch with us via the email, or it's probably the easiest way, and signing up directly on the website. Because yes, there will be plenty of meetings, but the easiest way is to get directly involved in the committees. there another question? Do speakers have questions for each other?
It seems there are no more questions.
A quick request that you share the I was not able to download the printout of the translation of the last speaker. I was able to follow it somewhat, but it would be great if you send out that as well. Probably you were already planning to do that. Thank you.
Yes, we will send out the slides and the translation document as well as the whole webinar recording. Yes. And if there is one question in the chat. Yes, how to resist accusations of Russian propaganda being what we are doing. A big question. I would also direct everybody to the Resist NATO campaign did a webinar on Russia and Ukraine. You can find on our website. But anybody want to add to that? Otherwise, I'll go into next steps. They are important. Okay, I think we're all just processing all the information we just heard. But yes, we just heard about US and NATO military base expansion really across Europe and around the world. And what can we do about this? Because it has horrible effects on people and the environment, but there are also people who are getting together and fighting back, which is also really inspiring to me to hear about how this is happening around the world. So I invite you all to join us in June, the 21st, 22nd, as was mentioned, in the Netherlands. There will be the People Summit, most likely in Amsterdam, and a protest action in The Hague to register our dissent against the NATO summit happening that week. Yes, so you can sign on to the campaign at the link that's been shared in the chat. And also you can get involved because we need everybody to build this campaign and also beyond the campaign. But we have committees working on planning the People Summit and the counter protest, as well as you can join the Education and Information Committee. We have a very active and needs to grow propaganda working group, which communications. We're doing informational posts and brochures and things to really get out this information. And then we also have a media and communications team. So that, yes, we can let everybody know that they should come to The Hague or do their own action locally. We'll also have a final webinar from the campaign, Campus Under Fire, NATO Militarization and Student Resistance, which I'm very looking forward to. I think we have some speakers might be in the chat. Yes, looking forward to that. Please stay tuned. You can follow us on, follow the campaign at resist.nato on Instagram to see when that's launched. And also, I think since you registered for this webinar, you should also receive an invitation via email. And also seeing in the chat, there's a manifesto that got started, yes, to denounce which was mentioned by Janice from Alphas Filipinas, the Germany-Philippines military agreement. Really important that we denounce this. Please sign on. And yes, Ula is also mentioning there will be an action between Yes, mentioning the demo that's happening in The Hague. It's Sunday, June 22nd. We hope to see you there. Can we go just to the final slide? Yes. So there'll be no peace in the city of justice with NATO in town, and we're going to show NATO they are not welcome and that we're fighting for a just peace, people's human rights, as Klaus said. Yes, we absolutely have to coordinate with other orgs, and that is definitely happening. We are trying to unite as broadly as possible while holding tight to our campaign points of unity. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for sticking with us. And we look forward to seeing you in the Netherlands. Long live international solidarity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bravo, great work. Thank you all.
Thank you.
No compromise, no retreat.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. See you then in the Netherlands.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
See you.